am videotaping this for not only your guys' purposes, but for mine as well. If I ever have a student being absent, a lot of times with my demonstrations, I'm now going to videotape them. So if Brad comes in and says, "What did I miss yesterday?" I'm going to say, "Here, go watch this." Okay? And you can see okay back there? All right. Now,
I'll move.
your station setup. You have a towel under your cutting board. The idea behind this is if I don't, my cutting board slides real easily on these tables. Okay? Because stainless steel is very slippery when it's wet. I now take my towel and put it down, and it's going to move, but not as easily. And I'm pushing on this pretty well to get it to move. So it's going to help keep it in place. Because if I'm standing here cutting and my cutting board's shooting across the table, I'm going to be hurt. Okay? So, a couple things. Getting a couple things out of the way. Again, if you have cuts, anything on your hand, if you cut yourself, do not be ashamed. Let me know immediately. Me and Miss B have bets out on who the first one's going to be. So hopefully one of you guys will eat some lunch today. Be careful with your knives. How many people first years are a little nervous right now? A little bit? A little bit anxious? You need to respect your knives. They will do a lot of damage. I should be talking, you should not be. Okay? Holding the knife. We talked yesterday about the different parts. As a review, this part here, right above the handle, is the bolster or the shank. That is where we are going to hold the knife. We kind of wrap our finger around that part and put our thumb on the opposite side and pinch it. Go ahead and do that. Okay? When I have holding my knife, my finger should be on the back side of this blade. Okay? So that's how you're going to hold it. Alec is going to be the first one to go like this maybe. Or maybe it might be Emily. I'm going to tell probably at least 5 of you a couple times, get your finger off the top of the knife. Get your finger off the top of the knife. Do not put your finger on top of the knife.
Don't do it.
I do not have as much pressure like this as I do when I hold the bolster, because then I can use my entire arm instead of just pushing down with my finger. Okay? Now, knives down. When you're using the knife, again, they're very sharp, they're deadly. This hand here is not just going to flap in the breeze. It has a purpose. This hand is the hand that holds the product. Anybody in here lefty? Okay, I'm going to have to work on my, oh my goodness gracious. I'm going to have to work on my lefty cutting skills, because I can kind of do it, okay, but not as well as right-handed. So, when you are cutting, my fingers are always going to be curled. I'm going to hold that bolster and put my index finger on the back side of this knife. Until your knives are broken in and your hand is broken in, you're probably going to develop a callus or a blister right here. Okay? That's going to be normal. When you are cutting, curl your fingers. When I cut, I always use this rocking motion. I never should hear this when I'm cutting, because I'm going to go home with a headache, and then your knife is going to dull out quickly. Because this beats up knives. Okay? When you're cutting, you're always going down and away from you. Okay? This is going to be uncomfortable, maybe, unless you've done this before. Okay? Fingers curled. My knife is actually always against my finger. When I do that, technically I could stand here and look at Connor and never cut myself, because I know where my knife is at all times. But I'm not going to take my eyes off my work. I'm always going to look down. Okay? Don't stand here and try and talk to Joe then while you're cutting. Okay? Keep your eyes on what you're doing. My posture. I'm not leaning over. I don't think anybody in here is really tall, so you shouldn't have to lean. If I'm leaning over a lot, your back's going to get tired. You're going to be cutting a lot. So when you're standing, keep your back straight as possible. And I know this sounds a little slow. I don't know the term we don't need to use. Boring. Okay, but it's important, because if your job is cutting 8 hours a day and you're hunched over, you're going to hurt. Okay? So keep your knife, your fingers against the knife. Knife is always pointing forward. If I want diagonal cuts, I'm not going to cut like this. I'm I'm going to turn my product so that it's at a diagonal. My body, my knife will always be facing forward. Okay? A lot of times I'll see students going like this. If you cut at an angle, you know, your cuts aren't going to come straight. Okay? You need to be cutting straight. Again, you're going to use this rocking motion. Your knife is always against your fingers, so you don't cut yourself and you're using it as a guide. I don't lean. If I start way over here on my cutting board, I'm not leaning as I go across. Okay? I shuffle my feet as I move across. That way I can use my whole cutting board. Instead of just using this little section and then having to clean up and then doing it again, I use the entire cutting board. Okay? First product. I'm going to demo each one of these for you, and then you're going to do it. Okay? Alright, first thing we're going to do today, and I'm going to take it easy on you to start off, is we're going to do some celery. This entire thing is called what? A stalk of celery. This entire piece. If I then pull one of these off, I have a rib. Okay? So if I tell Zach, or Jake, to go get 3 ribs of celery out of the walk-in, he better not come back with 3 of these. He better come back with 3 individual pieces. Okay? So a rib and a stalk. With me so far. Okay, now, where do vegetables grow? What's in the ground? Dirt, manure, waste, feces, worms, bugs, stink bugs. Nobody likes stink bugs.
Oh, there is stink bugs.
We need to wash these because there's dirt on it. Now that doesn't mean going over to the sink and getting detergent, washing it with soap and water. All I'm going to do is run these under cold water. You might have to get in here with your hands a little bit. Stop with the comments. And rub the dirt out. Okay, there are grooves in these. You might have to get your fingers in there. Okay? Now, I have my washed product. I'm actually going to pull off a different one of these. Also, I'm going to show you, you don't use this entire thing. Okay? Once I get down to the center, notice how I went from bright green to a dull yellow. This starts to get bitter. Once I get down to this part, I'm not going to use that. But that is not garbage. That does have use in my kitchen. Okay? We'll talk about that later though. Okay? I'm also going to wash one of these ones with the leaves, just to show you what you're supposed to do with the leaves as well. Okay? The first, the one with the leaves. I am not just going to chop the top of this off. Because if you kind of separate these leaves, you still have a nice usable part of celery. Okay? So all I want to do is kind of trim these leaves off the bottom so that I can see, and then the ones off the top. Again, these are not garbage. They do have a use. We will save them. Okay? Now, I have this piece of celery, and then I also have these bigger ones without the leaves. Now this one has a little bit of leafage at the end of these, so I am going to trim this. Okay? The bottom, the white part is edible. You do not have to cut it off to the green, which I see a lot of people doing. When I cut my celery, I'm very simply going to take a thin, that's maybe ½ an inch off the bottom at most. If I take too much off, I'm just wasting my product. Okay? So now I have my piece of celery. I need to trim this down so it's easier to use. If I try cutting this, it's longer than my knife. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into 3 pieces so it's easier to manage. Okay? This one here, I'll just cut in half. I'm going to trim the end of this one as well. Again, thin. I don't need to take a lot off. Now I have, that is, for the celery, would be the trimming and preparing stage. Okay? I'm not actually peeling it, but I am trimming any waste off. Okay? Now, I told you round vegetables are our enemy. So we need to make this called squaring it so it's not rolling around. With celery, very simply, you can just cut it in half. Okay? Now it's going to lay down a lot flatter for me. Okay? So I've gone from this to these to this, where it's laying flat. Okay? Now, I'm going to cut it into thin strips or matchsticks. These are a lot harder to do a square with, okay, because you can't make it into a square. Okay, so these are going to be more irregular pieces, but we will be looking for size on these. Okay, so now I'm going to take these quote-unquote slabs that I have and now cut them into my strips. Again, fingers curled, knife up against my fingers, cutting away from me. Notice how when I'm doing it, I'm kind of giving it a shove forward to ensure that I'm making the whole way through. Okay? You have to cut all the way through your product. So there's my julienne. So I went from large, you're going to be confused if you're not paying attention, to these, down to the pieces that lay flat. Now we have it into thin strips. Okay? Now I'm going to dice it. Turn it once like that when you cut it. Turn it this way, and then dicing, same way. Fingers curl, nice rocking motion, down and forward. As I cut, I am inching my feet. I'm not leaning my body. Everything is staying straight. Notice my fingers never become uncurled. Okay? Now I have my nice diced pieces. Okay? A couple things I did not mention to you. The back part of the knife is great for scraping down your cutting board. So when you're making a pile, use the back of your knife. Do not use your blade to scrape against the cutting board. One, it's going to ruin my cutting board, which is probably the bigger issue. And two, it's going to dull your knife. Okay? So use the back side of your blade. Questions? Big piece. Cut them down. Cut them in half, julienne them, dice them. Questions? There is some already pulled apart in the back. Everybody get 3 pieces and dice it.